I saved $1 for my daughter's wedding, but she spent my birthday with her stepmom. After 30 years of sacrifice, I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at my phone. The notification light blinked like it was mocking me. 30 years of working extra jobs, skipping vacations, and staying in my small house, all to build a wedding fund that would give my daughter the life I never had. I looked around at the birthday dinner I'd made. A homemade chocolate cake with 58 candles sat in the center of the table. The roast chicken, Allison's favorite, not even mine, was getting cold on the serving plate. The wine I'd splurged on remained unopened. My birthday dinner, alone. When the notification finally came, it wasn't the call I was waiting for. It was worse. A social media alert showed my daughter Allison at a fancy restaurant, raising a glass with Bradley's stepmother. The caption stabbed my heart. Celebrating with my real mom today. I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. Ever saved everything for an ungrateful child? Share your story below. After my husband died when Allison was 12, I made a promise. I took his life insurance money and started what I called Allison's Future Fund. I was determined that my daughter would have everything I couldn't give her while her father was alive. For years, I wore the same clothes until they frayed. I worked my teaching job during the day, tutored nights, and picked up summer school every year. I never took vacations. I skipped doctor appointments when money was tight. Everything went into that fund. Everything was for Allison. I promised myself that my daughter would have the dream wedding I never had. My own wedding had been at the courthouse, with a dinner we could barely afford afterward. Allison would have flowers and a beautiful dress and enough left over to start her married life without the struggles I faced. Since Mark died, Allison and I always spent my birthday together. It became our special tradition, just the two of us celebrating another year we'd made it through together. Even during her college years, she'd come home, or I'd visit her campus. It was the one day I felt sure of our bond. Just last week, we talked about my birthday dinner. "I'll be there, Mom," she said when I called to confirm. "What are you cooking?" she asked, not offering to bring anything or take me out. I didn't mind. Having her there would be gift enough. I spent hours making her favorite dessert, chocolate cake with buttercream frosting, even though it's not my favorite. I wanted to surprise her with this small gesture. On my own birthday, I was still thinking of ways to make her happy. As the hours passed with no sign of Allison, I sent text after text. "Are you running late?" Then, "Is everything okay?" Finally, "Please let me know you're all right. I'm worried." Each message showed as delivered, but none were answered. My hands shook as I scrolled through my feed again. There were more posts. Allison and Bradley's stepmother shopping earlier that day, lunch at that exclusive restaurant downtown, laughing together in the salon. These weren't spontaneous plans. They'd spent the entire day together. The truth hit me like a wave. Allison hadn't forgotten my birthday. She hadn't had an emergency. She had chosen to spend my birthday with another woman, someone who hadn't sacrificed a single thing for her, while leaving me alone with my cooling dinner and unlit candles. My phone rang, cutting through the silence of my empty house. It was Julie, a fellow teacher and my closest friend. "Happy birthday, Sarah," she said cheerfully. Her tone changed instantly when she heard my voice crack. "What's wrong? I'm coming over right now." 20 minutes later, Julie walked through my door without knocking. We'd long since exchanged keys. She found me still sitting at the dinner table, scrolling numbly through my phone. The cake sat untouched, the candles now put away, the dinner growing cold. "Oh, Sarah," Julie said, looking at my phone screen over my shoulder. "This isn't right." She scrolled through more posts, her expression hardening. "And this isn't the first time she's treated you like this, is it?" My mind flashed back to Allison's college graduation. Despite all my sacrifices to put her through school, she'd seated me in the back row. Bradley's parents and stepmother got the front row seats, close enough to make eye contact when Allison gave her speech. I'd made excuses for her then. She's just trying to impress her future in-laws, I told myself. It's important for her future. I'd smiled and acted like it didn't hurt to be treated like an afterthought. Last Thanksgiving came to mind. Allison had invited me to dinner at Bradley's family home, a gesture I'd been pathetically grateful for. When I arrived, I discovered my seat was at the kids' table, away from the main dinner conversation where Allison sat next to Bradley's stepmother. I remembered how I'd spent a month's worth of tutoring money on expensive gifts for Bradley's parents, gifts Allison presented as if they were from both of us. I'd been so pleased that she included me, not realizing she was using my money to impress people who already had everything. Once, I overheard Allison on the phone with Bradley whispering, "We need to have drinks at your place. My mom's house is embarrassingly small. I don't want anyone we know to see it." The same house where I'd raised her, skipping repairs and updates to add more to her fund. Sitting with Julie at my birthday table, I suddenly saw the pattern that had been forming for years. Each small betrayal I'd excused, each slight I'd swallowed, each time I'd told myself, she doesn't mean it, when deep down I knew she did. "Sarah," Julie said quietly, breaking into my thoughts. "What's this wedding looking like anyway? When is it happening? What have you two planned?" Her questions made me realize how little Allison had involved me, despite the money I was contributing. "I've set aside just over $1 million, I said, my voice small. Julie's coffee cup froze halfway to her mouth. "I've been saving since Mark died. Every extra penny for almost 30 years. $1 million? Julie's voice rose in disbelief, then quickly shifted to anger. "And she can't even spend your birthday with you? She can't even call?" She shook her head. "Sarah, something isn't right. Have you seen how she talks about this money?" I hesitated, then shook my head. "I don't snoop on my daughter, Julie." Even now, I was protecting Allison's privacy, her feelings, her reputation. "Maybe it's time you started looking out for yourself," Julie said firmly. "This isn't normal, Sarah. Something's going on, and you need to know what it is." I felt a heaviness in my chest, the certainty that something had fundamentally shifted in my relationship with my daughter, the fear that what I would discover would change everything. "Let's do some digging," Julie said, opening her laptop. "You have every right to know what's happening with a wedding you're paying for. Would you confront your daughter about this betrayal? Tell me in the comments." What we found shocked me to my core. Allison's Pinterest wedding boards showed plans for a wedding that would cost well beyond even the generous fund I'd saved. There were screenshots of venues that started at $100,000 just for the space. In our shared family email account, one I rarely checked anymore, I found dozens of messages about wedding details, vendor contracts, appointment confirmations, catering tastings, none of which Allison had mentioned to me. Allison had been making appointments with the most exclusive wedding vendors in the city, florists whose arrangements started at $500 each, photographers who charged $15,000 for a day, designers whose dresses cost more than my car. Normal daughters would want their mothers involved in planning, Julie pointed out, her voice gentle but firm, especially when the mother is paying for everything. "This isn't right, Sarah." I remembered offering to go dress shopping with Allison just last month. "I'm too busy right now, Mom," she'd said dismissively. "Maybe later." Later never came, and now I understood why. My stomach twisted as I made my decision. "There's a meeting at Chelsea Garden tomorrow afternoon," I said, pointing to an appointment confirmation. "She doesn't know I know about it. I'm going to be there." The next day, I parked my 10-year-old Honda a block away from Chelsea Garden, the most exclusive wedding venue in the city. With shaking hands, I made my way to the garden courtyard where I could watch without being seen. Right on time, a black SUV pulled up. Out stepped Allison, looking beautiful and confident. Bradley followed, then his father Richard, and finally his stepmother Diane, a polished woman with the kind of expensive highlights I could never afford. I felt sick as I heard Allison cheerfully telling the venue coordinator about their unlimited budget, thanks to family money. My money. The coordinator asked about mother of the bride preferences, and Allison smoothly turned to Diane. "What do you think, Mom? You have the best taste." I watched as my daughter deferred to Diane's opinion on everything from table settings to lighting. Allison laughed at her jokes, touched her arm affectionately, and looked at her with an admiration she hadn't shown me in years. I had to lean against a pillar to stay upright. When they finished at the venue, I followed them to Bloom, a florist whose arrangements I'd only seen in magazines. I stayed a careful distance behind, grateful that none of them ever looked back. They were too absorbed in their perfect wedding fantasy. As they discussed flowers with the designer, my phone rang in my purse. I quickly silenced it, but not before I saw Allison glance at her own phone, see my name, and decline the call without a moment's hesitation. She never even paused her conversation about $300 roses. I continued to watch as Allison enthused over flower arrangements that would cost more than a month of my teaching salary. "Peonies are my absolute favorites," she gushed to Diane. "Mom has such amazing taste," she added, squeezing the older woman's hand. Diane patted Allison's cheek in a maternal gesture that made my heart ache. "We're going to make this the wedding of the year," she promised. It was the kind of mother-daughter moment I had dreamed of sharing with Allison during wedding planning. When they headed to lunch, I followed in a daze. I took a table at the far end of the restaurant, hidden behind a large plant, but close enough to hear their conversation. I felt like I was watching a movie about strangers rather than my own family. I sat there, a ghost in my own daughter's life, watching her live a version of reality that didn't include me, except as a bank account. The waiter brought me water. I couldn't even think about food. "So," Richard said after they'd ordered, "what's your mother's involvement in all this, Allison? I'm surprised we haven't seen more of her in the planning." Allison waved her hand dismissively. "Mom's a bit overwhelmed by this scale of event," she said with a little laugh. "She's happy to just show up on the day. You know how teachers are, not really used to this level of sophistication." "Don't worry," Diane said, patting Allison's hand. "I'm happy to handle everything. I have experience with these social events. Sarah can just relax and enjoy being a guest." The way she said my name made it clear I was an afterthought. I felt invisible as they continued discussing my daughter's wedding as if I were nothing more than a check to be cashed. Not the woman who had worked 3 jobs to raise her. Not the mother who had sacrificed everything. "Excuse me?" the waiter said, suddenly appearing at my side. "Would you like to join the other party? You seem to be watching them." My face burned with embarrassment as I frantically gathered my purse. I nearly knocked over my water glass in my rush to leave. I hurried toward the exit, head down, praying Allison wouldn't see me. As I pushed through the door, I almost collided with a server carrying drinks to their table. The drive home passed in a blur. I couldn't remember stopping at lights or making turns. My mind kept replaying Allison's words, her easy dismissal of me, the way she called another woman Mom without a moment's hesitation. At home, I collapsed onto my couch and called Julie, tears streaming down my face. "You were right," I choked out. "It's worse than we thought." I could barely form complete sentences as the pain washed over me. Julie arrived 20 minutes later with a bottle of wine and a fierce protectiveness that made me cry harder. "I'm here," she said, wrapping her arms around me. "Tell me everything." I poured out the whole ugly story. The venue, the flowers, the lunch conversation. As I spoke, Julie's expression shifted from sympathy to outrage. "She's using you, Sarah. This isn't what a loving daughter does." "I don't know what to do," I admitted, feeling lost. "Should I confront her? Cut off the money? Pretend I don't know?" Julie took my hands in hers. "I think we need to know exactly what Allison is saying about this money. About you. Then you can decide." I pulled back slightly. "I've already spied on her once today. I feel terrible about it." "Sarah," Julie said firmly, "you need to protect yourself now, not Allison. She's clearly not protecting you." After another glass of wine, I agreed to a plan. I would invite Allison and Bradley for dinner, ostensibly to discuss wedding plans. I would try to get them to reveal their true intentions. 2 days later, I prepared a simple meal, nothing like the elaborate birthday dinner that still sat in my refrigerator. My heart wasn't in cooking Allison's favorites anymore. Allison and Bradley arrived 30 minutes late, full of apologies about a meeting that ran long. Allison barely hugged me, already talking about wedding details as she walked through the door. While Bradley used the bathroom, Allison stepped into the kitchen to take a call. I followed quietly, stopping just outside the door when I heard her mention Diane's name. "Yes, we're at Mom's little dinner now," she was saying, her voice dripping with condescension. "The house looks even smaller than last time," she continued with a laugh. "I can't believe I grew up here." "Don't worry, we'll make our excuses early." I told Bradley to mention a movie we're running late for. My blood ran cold at her next words. "Once we get the wedding fund transferred, We won't have to pretend anymore. I've already looked at properties near you guys. Bradley thinks we can use most of the money for a down payment instead of wasting it all on one day. Bradley's voice joined hers as he entered the kitchen. Does she suspect anything? About using the wedding fund for the house instead? He asked quietly. Allison laughed, a sound that used to bring me joy but now cut like glass. My mother is too desperate for my approval to ever question anything. She'll sign whatever I put in front of her. I backed away silently, my mind strangely calm despite the hurricane in my heart. I returned to my seat at the table, arranging my face into a pleasant mask just as they returned. What would you do with that $1 million now? Drop your ideas below. I served dinner with mechanical movements, seeing my daughter and her fiancé clearly for the first time. Every smile was calculated. Every question about wedding plans was met with vague answers and outright lies. So the venue at Chelsea Garden looked amazing online, I said casually, watching their faces. Have you had a chance to tour it yet? Not yet, Allison lied smoothly. We're considering a few places. She glanced at Bradley, a silent warning passing between them. Bradley cleared his throat. Actually, Sarah, we wanted to talk about transferring the funds soon. We're making deposits and need to secure dates. I nodded pleasantly. Of course. I'll set up a meeting with my financial advisor next week. Why don't I let you know when it's confirmed? They left quickly after dinner, making excuses about being late for a movie. I stood in my doorway, watching their expensive car pull away, and felt something shift inside me. The pain was still there, but alongside it was something new: determination. I called Julie as soon as their taillights disappeared. You were right, I said simply, and I know what I need to do. Julie arrived 30 minutes later with a bottle of champagne and a fierce smile. Tell me everything, she said as she poured us each a glass. We stayed up late that night, planning my next move. The following Monday, I sat across from Michael, my financial advisor of 20 years. His eyes widened as I explained what I wanted to do with the wedding fund. Are you sure about this, Sarah? It's going to cause some family conflict. I'm certain, I said, my voice steady. Allison has made her feelings perfectly clear. Now it's time I honored my own needs. I allocated half of the fund to establish a scholarship foundation in Mark's name, something my husband would have loved. It would help students who couldn't afford college, students like I had been before I worked my way through school. The other half would secure my retirement and fund the dreams I'd put aside for 3 decades. No more tutoring nights. No more summer school. No more putting off doctor visits or driving a car that broke down monthly. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I booked a trip to Italy. I'd always dreamed of seeing Rome, Florence, Venice, places Mark and I had planned to visit someday. Someday had finally arrived. I wrote a letter to Allison explaining my decision, to be delivered after everything was finalized. I chose my words carefully, not to hurt her, but to be honest about what I'd discovered and why I was choosing a different path. When I signed the final paperwork transferring the funds to their new purposes, a weight lifted from my shoulders. I felt lighter than I had in 30 years. The money that had been both my burden and my purpose was now redirected toward joy rather than manipulation. I texted Allison the next day, asking her to meet me for lunch at Bellini's, an upscale restaurant I'd never been able to afford before. She agreed immediately, probably assuming we'd discuss the fund transfer. Allison arrived clutching a folder of wedding expenses, barely greeting me before launching into talk about deposits and timelines. I smiled and ordered a $200 bottle of wine, something that clearly surprised her. So, I said after the waiter poured our wine, how was my birthday celebration? I watched her face carefully, noting how quickly she shifted from confusion to calculation. Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry about that, she said, not sounding sorry at all. Things got crazy with wedding planning. It wasn't a big deal, was it? Not compared to planning the biggest day of my life. I nodded thoughtfully. And what exactly are your plans for the wedding fund? Walk me through how you'll use it. Allison hesitated, glancing down at her folder. Well, securing our future. Making sure we start off on the right foot. Her vague answer confirmed everything. That's funny, I said, taking a sip of my excellent wine. That's exactly what I decided to do with it too. I reached into my purse and pulled out my own folder, sliding it across the table. Inside were documents showing the new scholarship foundation, my retirement plan, and my confirmed trip to Italy, departing the following week. Did you predict what she would do? Comment your reaction. The color drained from Allison's face as she flipped through the papers. Her fingers trembled against the crisp documents. "What is this?" she whispered. "What have you done?" "I've secured my future," I said calmly. "Just like you planned to do with my money." "You can't do this!" Allison's shock quickly turned to anger. "That money was for my wedding, for my house. You promised me. I promised to take care of you, and I did. For 30 years. I didn't promise to fund a house near your in-laws after you mocked my home and called another woman Mom." You were spying on me?" Allison stammered, her eyes wide. "You misunderstood everything. We were just talking about options." I looked directly into my daughter's eyes. "Once we get the wedding fund transferred, we won't have to pretend anymore," I quoted. My mother is too desperate for my approval to ever question anything. Each word was a perfect echo of what I'd heard in my kitchen. "I didn't mean—" Allison tried to backtrack, her voice rising. "You're taking things out of context." "The context is quite clear," I said, taking another sip of wine. "You've been using me for my money while treating me as an embarrassment. That stops today." Allison's face contorted with rage. "You selfish bitch!" she hissed, not caring who heard. "After everything I've put up with, your boring little life, your embarrassing house, your teacher friends." I felt strangely calm in the face of her fury. "I raised you alone after your father died. I worked 3 jobs. I saved every penny for you. The fund was always mine to give. Or redirect. If you don't fix this right now, you'll never see me again," Allison threatened, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. "I'll cut you out of my life completely." I gave her a sad smile. "You already did that long ago, Allison. I just finally noticed." The truth of those words settled between us like a physical presence. Allison grabbed her purse and stormed out of the restaurant, nearly knocking over a waiter in her haste. I watched her go, feeling a complex mix of grief and peace that I couldn't quite name. My phone immediately began buzzing with texts and calls. Allison, Bradley, even his father. I turned it off and slipped it back into my purse. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I ordered dessert. Tiramisu, which I'd always wanted to try. In the days that followed, I heard through mutual friends about the aftermath. Bradley's family canceled the lavish wedding plans when they learned they would need to pay for them. The perfect venue, the rare flowers, the designer dress, all abandoned. Allison and Bradley's relationship quickly showed cracks without the promise of my money to smooth things over. They fought about finances, about whose fault it was, about what to do next. A month later, I received a terse email informing me that the wedding had been postponed indefinitely. I read it while packing my suitcase for Italy, feeling sad for the dream that had died but certain of my decision. I placed Mark's photo carefully between layers of clothing in my suitcase. "We're finally going to Italy," I whispered to his smiling face. "Better late than never." Julie drove me to the airport, promising to water my plants and keep me updated on any important news. "You deserve this," she said fiercely as we hugged goodbye. "Don't you dare feel guilty." As the plane took off, I felt both grief and excitement warring in my chest. I was leaving behind the life I'd known, the life defined by sacrifice and Allison's needs, and flying toward something unknown. Italy was more beautiful than I'd imagined. The ancient stones of Rome, the Renaissance masterpieces of Florence, the magical canals of Venice. I drank it all in like a woman who'd been thirsting for beauty her entire life. In my hotel in Rome, I received a surprising email from Mark's sister Catherine, whom I hadn't seen since the funeral. She'd heard about the scholarship in Mark's name and wanted to reconnect. "He would be so proud," she wrote. "Can we meet while you're in Europe?" We met at a cafe near the Spanish Steps, 2 women with silver in our hair, finding connection after years of distance. Catherine had moved to London after Mark died, unable to bear the reminders of her brother. Now she was eager to be involved in the scholarship foundation. Together, we selected the first scholarship recipient, a bright young woman whose application essay about working multiple jobs to help her single mother had moved us both to tears. In her determined face, I saw myself at that age. 3 months into my travels, I received a text from Allison. "How are you?" Just 3 simple words that revealed nothing and everything. I waited a day before responding, choosing my words carefully. "I'm well. Traveling through Italy, then headed to Greece. I hope you're finding your way forward." My response was measured, open to healing but with clear boundaries. When I returned home, Allison asked if we could meet for coffee. I suggested a cafe near my new condo. I'd sold the house where I'd raised her and bought a bright modern space that better suited my new life. Allison looked thinner, less polished than I remembered. "The wedding's off," she said after an awkward greeting. "Bradley and I broke up. His family. Things changed after the money disappeared." I finished for her. I didn't say it cruelly, just honestly. "I'm sorry," she said, the words clearly difficult for her. "For what I said, for how I treated you. I didn't realize what I was doing until it was gone." I listened without interrupting. Part of me wanted to comfort her as I always had, but another part, a stronger part, held firm. "Can we try again?" she asked hesitantly. "I know things will never be the same, but maybe we can build something new?" "I'd like that," I said carefully. "But you're right. It won't be the same. I have my own life now, Allison. My own plans and dreams that don't revolve around you." They were shocked by her decision. Would you have the courage to do the same? 1 year later, my condo was filled with laughter as I hosted a dinner party for my expanding circle of friends. Julie was there, along with Catherine, who now visited regularly, and several colleagues who had become close friends during my transformation. The walls displayed photos from my travels, the Colosseum at sunset, the blue domes of Santorini, the lavender fields of Provence. Alongside them were pictures of scholarship recipients, their faces bright with possibility. Allison arrived as one of the guests, bringing a bottle of wine and a homemade dessert. Our relationship was healing slowly, built now on more honest foundations. She greeted my friends warmly, no longer embarrassed by my teacher friends. As I looked around at the gathering, I realized I was no longer defined solely as Allison's mother. I was Sarah, a traveler, a philanthropist, a friend, a woman with her own identity and worth beyond what I gave to others. That night, as I fell asleep in my beautiful new bedroom, I realized I no longer regretted my decision. Redirecting the wedding fund had freed both of us, me from a lifetime of sacrifice, and Allison from the belief that she could build happiness on manipulation. I thought about how sometimes the greatest gift you can give a child is showing them you value yourself. Not through words, but through actions that say clearly, "I matter too." The Scholarship Foundation was flourishing, helping 5 students this year instead of the original one. Each recipient reminded me a little of myself at that age. Determined, hardworking, deserving of a chance. My next trip was already planned. A month in Japan during cherry blossom season. I no longer waited for permission or put my dreams last on the list. At 60, I was finally living for myself. The contrast between my old life and new still amazed me sometimes. Where I once counted every penny for Allison's future, I now balanced generosity with self-care. Where I once measured my worth through my daughter's approval, I now found it within myself. More of Mark's family had reached out after hearing about the scholarship. Cousins I'd lost touch with, an aunt who'd moved across the country. My world was expanding in ways I'd never imagined possible. I created new traditions for myself, small celebrations of life's pleasures that I'd denied myself for decades. Chief among them was my birthday, which I now spent exactly as I wished, whether that meant a party with friends or a quiet day of self-indulgence. For my 60th birthday, Allison joined the celebration, bringing a thoughtfully chosen gift and a card that acknowledged the day's importance. The hurt wasn't completely gone, but it had faded enough to allow new patterns to form. I came to understand that some relationships can only heal when both people value themselves properly. As long as I was a doormat, Allison would wipe her feet on me. Only by standing firm could I create the possibility of genuine connection. The hard-won wisdom from my journey was this: generosity without boundaries isn't truly generous. It creates dependency, entitlement, and ultimately resentment on both sides. True giving must come from a place of security and self-respect. Has this story inspired you to value yourself more? Share this with someone who needs to hear it.